let's take a close look at one of the most famous documents in history. But we're going to focus on one tiny little detail that might just change the way you think about how the United States began.
Okay, so if you zoom in on the very top of the Declaration of Independence, you see that famous line, the United Declaration of the 13 United States of America. But did you ever notice the U in United? It's lowercase. Now, it's easy to just write that off as, some 18th century typo. But what if it's not? What if that tiny lowercase u is actually a massive clue, pointing to a forgotten, failed first version of the United States, a version that almost fell apart before it ever really got going? To solve this little mystery, we have to dig into a 13-year gap in American history that, let's be honest, most of us just kind of skim over. It's that period between the Big Declaration in 1776 and when George Washington finally took office as president. Think about it. The Declaration gets signed in 1776, but Washington doesn't become president until 1789. So what was going on for those 13 years? Well, America was test driving its first government, a system called the Articles of Confederation. And spoiler alert, it was a complete and total disaster.
Let's call this whole period America 1.0. This first shot out of government wasn't born from confidence or ambition. It was born from fear. It was a direct reaction to everything the colonists had just escaped from under British rule.
See, the Articles of Confederation didn't create a single unified country, not like we think of it today. Instead, it set up a firm league of friendship. It was less like one nation and more like 13 little independent countries that just kind of pinky promised to be allies. And you can see why they did it, right? I mean, they had just fought a long, bloody war to get away from a powerful king and a distant government telling them what to do. The absolute last thing they wanted was to turn around and build that same kind of monster themselves. So, in their effort to avoid tyranny, they created a government that was intentionally, almost comically, weak. But that firm league of friendship pretty quickly started to look more like a chaotic family brawl. The whole experiment started to crumble, and fast. And I mean real chaos. The states started acting like rivals. New York was slapping tariffs on stuff coming in from Connecticut. Maryland and Virginia were practically at war over who owned the Potomac River. Meanwhile, the national government couldn't tax anyone, so it was flat broke. It couldn't pay its war debts, there was no army, so pirates were attacking American ships, and British troops were just hanging out in forts on U.S. soil, refusing to leave. Then it all just boiled over when farmers in Massachusetts rose up in armed rebellion against their own state's taxes. Don't just take my word for it. The situation was so bad that George Washington himself was just horrified. He wrote that the country was on the edge of anarchy and confusion, and he was worried they'd become a total joke, contemptible in the eyes of Europe. He was watching his life's work just fall to pieces. Okay, so the country's basically on fire. This chaos was the wake-up call. The leaders realized that their fear of a strong government had led them to create one so weak it was useless. This is the moment a brilliant young politician named James Madison steps onto the stage. Now this is where it gets really interesting. A big convention was called in Philadelphia. The official story, the public reason, was just to tweak the Articles of Confederation a little bit. But James Madison, he showed up with a secret, much more radical plan. Throw the whole thing in the trash and start over. The convention immediately turned into a huge fight between two totally different ideas. Madison pushed his Virginia plan, which said representation in the new government should be based on population. Naturally, the big states loved this, but the small states freaked out and countered with the New Jersey plan, demanding every state get an equal vote, just like before. It was big states versus small states. So how did they pull it off? How did they build a new government from the ashes of that first failure? Well, they took the painful lessons they learned from the chaos of the 1780s and used them as a roadmap for what not to do. The new constitution that they came up with was basically a direct answer to three huge lessons they learned from the failure of America 1.0. 1, you need a stronger government. 2, you have to make sure that stronger government can't become a tyranny. And 3, you need to control what they called mob rule. All right, lesson 1 was all about giving the government some muscle. To fix the chaos, the new federal government got real power. The power to tax people directly, the power to raise a national army, and, this was huge, the power to regulate business between the states, which put an end to all those little trade wars. But that created a new, terrifying problem. How do you give a government all this power without accidentally creating the very king you just got rid of? Their solution was honestly pretty genius. Don't put all the power in one place, spread it out. So they slice the government's power into three separate co-equal branches. You've got the legislative branch, that's Congress. Their job is to write the laws. Then the executive branch, the president, who enforces the laws. And finally, the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, which interprets the laws. Each one has its own job, and crucially, each one can check the power of the other two.
Now, this last lesson is a little more controversial. Things like Shays' Rebellion really spooked the founders, who were, let's face it, wealthy, elite guys. They got really worried about pure democracy, what they called the passions of the people, or mob rule. They were afraid that temporary, popular anger could lead to terrible decisions. So they designed the system with some intentional speed bumps between the voters and actual power.
You can see this idea perfectly in how they designed Congress. They created two parts. The House of Representatives was the voice of the people. Members are elected every 2 years, so they're always responsive. But the Senate was meant to be the level head, the place that cools things down. Originally, senators weren't even elected by the people at all. They were picked by state governments for long 6-year terms.
So what you get at the end of all this is America 2.0, the Constitution. It's a system that's literally built on compromise and friction. Power is scattered everywhere, between the federal government and the states, and across the three branches. The whole design forces them to argue and negotiate to get anything done, which in theory prevents any one group from getting too powerful. But the framers weren't arrogant enough to think they had created a perfect system for all time. And maybe one of the smartest things they did was include a process for changing the Constitution. It was their way of admitting, hey, we can't predict the future. They knew the country would evolve, and the government had to be able to evolve with it.
Which really brings us to the big question for today. This entire complex system was designed as a solution to the specific problems of a broke, weak confederation of 13 farm states back in the 1780s. So how well is that 18th century design holding up to the pressures of the 21st century? That's the real stress test.